So, as it's tank week, let's make ourselves a competitive Space Marine armour list. Hello and welcome back to Artisans Tactics, the strategy-minded 40k channel, where we've been going over everything Space Marine for the last few weeks. This week is Tank Week, where we're looking at all the ways we can use our tanks to overpower the enemy. With that in mind, I thought I'd share one of my competitive Space Marine lists I've been working on and building towards. It's something a little different to the standard Iron Hands armies that I've been seeing a lot all over the place. Without further ado, let's get back to it. So this is a 2000 point list, and we're going to be running it as a successor chapter of the Iron Hands. For our successor traits, we're going to take Stealthy to give all of our vehicles a 2-up save when in cover when the enemy is greater than 12 inches away from them, which should hopefully be most of the time for most of the units. And we're going to take Master Artisans, which I'm not going to lie is my favourite out of all of the successor traits. In this list we're really going to get our absolute highest value out of Master Artisans, and we'll see how in a second. We'll be running these as an Iron Hands successor to gain access to their incredibly nice Devastator Doctrine buff, which is re-rolling once to hit on all heavy weapons and also being able to move and shoot for no penalty on our heavy weapons as well. This will mean that all of our tanks are incredibly mobile. Typically they'll be able to reposition by 10 inches per turn, either make sure that they have good line of sight on the enemy or to be able to step back out of range of retaliation. Being an Iron Hands successor will also give us access to all of their juicy stratagems, particularly bonuses to repairs and access to the Ironstone, which we can buy in as a successor chapter for an additional CP. So the list is a battalion and a spearhead. In the battalion we have a chapter master on a bike with a Stormbolter and Power Fist. He is there to be a great reliable source of rerolls. In particular, he's going to be wanting to hang out with the Stalkers, which will often get a negative to hit if they're forced to target ground units. Being on a bike, he will have 8 bolter shots hitting on ballistic skill 2 each turn, which is very nice, and he has a very cheap Power Fist, just so if the enemy does get too close, he has the option of charging in and actually hitting them with a whole load of nasty attacks. Then we have a lieutenant with an Ironstone, which will aim to be standing near the chapter master, further buffing the vehicles that he is upgrading. Depending on the opponent, I'd want to put the Ironstone next to whichever ones of my vehicles I felt would be the highest priority threat for the opponent. Against, say, an Eldar Flyer list, I'd want to put him next to the Hunters and Stalkers. Maybe against more of a Horde list, I'd think about putting him with the Invictors. To fill out the battalion, I've got some barebones troops units, 2 units of intercessors with bolt rifles. I'd also take the auxiliary grenade launcher for each of these to use the Master Artisans reroll, and 1 unit of scouts either to screen an important area of my lines or to start on a midfield objective. We have 3 Invictor warsuits with the autocannons. In the right matchup, I think about putting these right forward to attempt first turn charges and disrupt an enemy gun line, but I've chosen to give them the autocannons because they're actually really quite a decent shooting unit in their own right, and they could be deployed at the front of the army to countercharge enemy elements that are coming in. All of their little guns actually make them quite decent anti-horde as well, so these can really choose to either go forward, be aggressive, hang back or countercharge, so they're really very flexible and can be used to react to the right opponent. Master Artisans works very nicely with the autocannons as well, and it works incredibly with their Power Fists in close combat. Being able to reroll that 1 failed hit and 1 failed wound is just awesome when each successful attack can do 3 damage. Now we get into the main tank line. We have 3 Hunters with Stormbolters and Hunter-Killer missiles. The Stormbolters are just there to be used opportunistically to help mow down hordes, and that Sky Spear missile array will put some very reliable hurts on armour, as it automatically rerolls all of its hits, and then it will reroll its wound roll each turn with Master Artisans, so it should be good for 1 las cannon hit on an attack per turn. Hunters are also stupidly durable. With the Stealthy trait, they are harder to kill than a Lehman Russ tank commander and less than half the cost. They also all have Hunter-Killer missiles, which we get onto in a second. Next we have 3 of the new Impulsors armed with the Bellicasters missile array, 2 Stormbolters and an Iron Hail Heavy Stubber. Now these are primarily here as a flying screen and an option for going to claim midfield objectives. As they have the fly keyword, they don't care about being tagged in close combat and can happily fall back and shoot if an enemy gets a troops unit to them. As well as the missile shot, which we can reroll with the Master Artisans trait, they also have a bunch of small anti-infantry firepower to help bully troops units hiding in the middle of the board. Next we have a Spearhead Detachment headed with a Tech Marine, who I can use a command point for to let him heal a vehicle twice with the Iron Hands doctrine, but he's mainly just here to be a mandatory HQ choice. We have 3 Whirlwinds with Vengeance missiles, Storm Bolters and Hunter Killer missiles, who will chill at the back, and with their enormous range and reasonable strength shooting with the Master Artisans rerolls, they'll be able to put some very reliable damage on whichever unit I feel is the biggest threat on the entire map. If they're not needed to take out an enemy heavy, then they also have the option of trying to wipe out some troops that are camping on unseen objectives at the back of the enemy's deployment zone. And to round off the list, we have 3 Stalkers with Storm Bolters and Hunter Killer missiles, who will typically want to stay with the Chapter Master to give them 4 rerolls to hit, unless we're fighting a flyer heavy opponent, in which case their +1 to hit and natural Iron Hands heavy weapons reroll should have them being accurate enough. So let's talk about those Hunter Killer missiles then. They're one of the hidden weapons of the list. If I do get first turn with this list, then every tank will fire off its Hunter Killer missile at a hard target turn 1, and I'll ensure that I use the Master Artisan's reroll for the Hunter Killer missile before firing the rest of the tank, so I don't waste it. That means that each missile will hit 8 out of every 9 times, and wound 3 out of every 4 times. It has AP -3 for being the Devastator doctrine, so we'll ignore most armour. When you add that to the Impulsor's missile arrays and the Hunter's Sky Spear missiles, then that averages 1 dead knight in 1 turn, never mind all of the other firepower, the Whirlwinds, Stalkers, Invictors, or any of the other little guns. So straight off the bat, that's an incredibly nasty alpha strike. I feel like this list will be quite hard to wipe off the table, as it has 15 decently durable vehicles, some of which are even toughness 8, and all of them will have 2-up armour saves to any long-range enemy shooting unless it can ignore cover. On top of that, we also have an Ironstone running around, which will allow me to reduce the damage taken by 1, which will give the opponent some tricky target priority decisions. I feel the list is very strong against anti-air with all of those Hunters and Stalkers, so Eldar Flyers should hopefully not give it too much of a problem. We've got a decent amount of ignores line of sight shooting with the Whirlwinds, which should help clear troops from objectives. Over the list there are around about 180 low strength shots on average, but obviously this could go wildly up or down if the enemy isn't charging up into my face to be shot by a lot of Storm Bolters. There are some weaknesses to this list. I don't have very many CP, as I've chosen to spend more of my points in tanks rather than troops, and that also means I might struggle to secure some objectives against hordes or other high infantry armies. I also don't have incredibly strong close combat potential. The Invictors will put in some work, as should the Intercessors and the Chapter Master, but this list nightmare will be getting bogged down in a huge horde of Plague Bearers or something similar. If they reached the back line and the tanks weren't able to retreat, then that would be pretty much game over. I am quite pleased with this list. I think that it would have a bit of a psychological impact on the table when you see just how many 2-up save wounds you have to chew through to make any real damage, and that the loss of any one vehicle isn't really a big deal for the army. I'm going to look forward to fielding it on the tabletop when I eventually get my large backlog of projects sorted and Games Workshop gets round to releasing some impulsors for me. If you can see any efficiency improvements in the list, then please let me know down in the comments. I haven't actually even decided on a warlord trait for the army yet, but I don't think it's necessarily going to have the biggest change to how the list plays. Hope that helps inspire some other people's list to try out something different anyway. Thanks very much for listening to another Auspex Tactics video. Feel free to subscribe for more similar content. I'll be doing a couple more army list reviews over the coming weeks, and over the weekend we're going to be looking at Rhinos, Razorbacks and Land Raiders. I'll see you guys in the next video.